Aloha, everyone, and welcome to the last day of the virtual live stream of VERGE Hawaii, which is our official Asia-Pacific Clean Energy Summit. It produced in partnership with the Hawaii State Energy Office. I'm Elaine Shea, VERGE Program Director at GreenBiz, and I'm your co-host at VERGE Virtual.
I'm John Davies, Vice President and Senior Analyst at GreenBiz. Aloha.
Aloha. So we are joining you from the Sidebar stage, live streamed right now in sunny Honolulu. It's the very last day, day 3 of our plenaries, and we're going to be engaging with you online. Hopefully you're registered for the virtual live stream. You'll get an archived copy afterward if you are, and we are going to be bringing you an interview pretty soon after this break, so stay tuned.
You ever think about all those buildings out there wasting all that energy? We do. It's where 20% of the world's carbon emissions come from, and it's where we draw the line on climate change. But by tapping the billions in energy efficiency reserves locked inside buildings, we can guarantee their owners a new source of revenue and score big points with Energy Star and LEED. Carbon Lighthouse, a different kind of energy service invested in a 100% renewable Hawaii.
Imagine a truly sustainable Hawaii, where we produce enough food to feed our families, use our abundant natural resources to power our homes, and find better uses for our waste. More local food, more renewable energy, less waste. See how Ulupono Initiative is investing in a more sustainable Hawaii. Visit ulupono.com.
One of the commanders came to us and said, "I will never fold a flag and give it to the parents of somebody who died changing a light bulb. So you go make this sailor-proof so that they can focus on their mission and protecting our country." And challenge accepted.
Welcome back. We are here with an exclusive interview with our CEO at GreenBiz, Eric Farrow. Welcome.
Thank you. Exclusive. I like that. As far as you know, it's exclusive.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
Eric, so we've got a lot of great things going on, but I think we had an amazing opening afternoon. What was your highlight from that?
My highlight was the microgrid actually working. So, as you know, we power everything that's in this room with 100% renewable microgrid. This is our 7th microgrid deployment at VERGE's around the world. And last year was the first time we had a glitch. And when I was ironically up there demoing the microgrid with cool drone footage of how we built it last year, we had a glitch in the microgrid, and it sent essentially a dirty signal, which knocked out the confidence monitor first. So I jumped off the stage to see the big screens, and then the big screens went dark. So we got it sorted out, but my joke last year was, at least you know we're actually using a microgrid. So this year, actually, it worked the entire time, and that's thanks to our friends at Optera. They did all the systems integration, project management, and then Spray has a really cool microgrid controller that essentially manages all the different assets. And in distributed energy world, you're going to have all different kinds of energy sources working at the same time, going to battery storage. So here, we had probably the most beautiful solar array in the world called the Smart Flower. As you saw, it's absolutely gorgeous. You can see pictures of it on the Twitter stream. That's our primary energy source. And then we also had a small micro wind turbine, which was cool. And then I think the thing that got the most interest, though, actually is ice energy. So it's ice storage. So we were taking the solar, and we were putting that energy into ice. We were making ice, basically, with the sun. And then that ice then turns into cooling. So if you think about Hawaii, all the schools, with their mandate to get the schools air conditioned, this is a really great opportunity. So that's ultimately the fact that worked. That's my favorite part.
But, you know, there was a hiccup with it because the governor had 10 minutes of ad-lib speech if it failed this year.
That's true.
But the governor was great, right?
The governor's great. I think the biggest thing is 2 weeks ago when he basically signed legislation that aligned Hawaii's energy goals with the Paris Accord. And that's more than just symbolism, that's action. But I think for Hawaii, it's very galvanizing. It really gets the whole state excited about their commitment to 100% renewable. And it's a very bold, they're the only state in the country that's made that commitment. They were the first state to make the commitment to align around Paris. And Hawaii, there's an expression of 1 degree of separation. Everybody knows each other, so that can either work for you or against you. And in this case, I think it's a really positive thing because everybody is very proud of this and wants to be out in front. So it was great to see him show that leadership here. He got a big round of applause for that.
And I think what's really great about VERGE Hawaii is that we bring in leaders from all the different islands.
Right.
And I've been very impressed with some of the mayors that we've had and some of the other people in leadership roles. So what were some of the highlights of those sort of talks on our main stage?
Energy conferences, honestly, are a little boring. Sometimes you kind of want to put a pencil in your eye because it's really, really dull. That was not the case here. One of the highlights was the mayor of Kauai singing, spontaneously on stage.
Take your seats.
That was funny.
I think Hawaiians have a more natural connection to nature and their surroundings, and I think that came through here. You saw that there was just an enormous amount of personality. There was a joke that I can't repeat here that you can go back and live stream archive.
The American Samoa Territory Office.
That's a first. I'd say that was a first for a VERGE stage. Completely inappropriate.
I know, the R-rated version of
yeah, we're gonna have to PG that down somehow. Turtles. I swam with a turtle my first day here, which is great. We saw Barack Obama last night at a restaurant, which is awesome.
And he's closing today.
And my daughter left a note on the door saying my dad wants you to close his energy conference.
So we'll see.
Call me. But she doesn't have a phone, so he didn't call her. So that didn't work. What else? Oh, here's a highlight. Our Accelerate contestants yesterday.
They were amazing.
They
from
were
all
awesome.
over the world. An incredible wind turbine from Japan. The crazy thing is Solstice, the company Solstice, Community Solar, which has been a big theme here, energy equity, won on the solstice.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
That's right.
How crazy
That's true.
is that?
Check them out, Solar for Good. So that's a Twitter handle.
Yeah, Steph Spears, she's born in Hawaii, grew up in Boston, but that's something at scale. That's how you're going to get to scale. You know, if you're a renter, if you're living in a building, that is not a barrier. Fundamentally, that's not a barrier. And it's interesting to hear the Navy say that they like that model.
Yeah.
You know,
It's hyper-localization. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's also a big opportunity. I'm going to say this to the big companies that we work with, the McDonald's, the companies that are in communities, particularly difficult communities where you don't have the socioeconomic ability to go get the financing you need. I think those companies can take a real leadership role, put in community solar, and take the barrier away.
Well, so this morning we had a bunch of workshops, and the packed room, the one with the just standing room only at 8:30 in the morning this morning, was the community-based renewable energy workshop.
Nice.
So there's a lot of heat in that area, literally, where a lot of people are trying to figure out how can they be more resilient community and how can they integrate in the grid.
Okay, so just one last thing. We're about ready to finish up, but what's next?
Well, we have VERGE Santa Clara in September 19th to 21st. And we're going to be back here next year. Hold on, let me get the exact dates. June 12 to 14 at the Hilton Hawaiian Village.
Okay, great. So save the dates. We're going to go over to the main stage very shortly, so stay tuned.
Good morning and aloha. My name is Colleen Hanabusa, and I am the Congresswoman for Hawaii's 1st Congressional District. I am honored to be able to greet you on your 3rd and final day of VERGE Hawaii, Asia Pacific's premier clean energy summit. I trust that your time at the summit has been not only enjoyable, but productive, and that by coming together at VERGE and sharing your knowledge, ideas, and most of all, enthusiasm for a clean energy future, you will take with you the vision and creative spark to innovate the high-impact energy solutions necessary to make our 100% renewable energy goals a reality. As a member of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, I wait in anticipation of the work each of you will accomplish in your various sectors to advance our nation's clean energy future, and I wish you aloha as you complete your final day at VERGE and look forward to seeing the products of your collective ideas. Mahalo.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage GreenBiz Chairman and Executive Editor, Joel McCower.
Good morning, aloha. We're on the home stretch here. Day 3, we've got just a couple of hours of really good content coming, so I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad that those of you who are on the live stream are watching along. In fact, let's go very quickly to Sidebar co-host Elaine Shea to hear a little bit about Day 3. What's going on, Elaine?
Yeah, so it's the closing day, and we've talked about a lot of things. We've dove really deep in our breakouts, and we have been we've been understanding a lot of challenges that the state is facing, and so I think the key here is to try to see this closing as a more expansive way of looking at what you're doing, to get some additional perspective, not only globally, but also in terms of people who are actually doing the things that you're wanting to emulate or at least try to replicate. So what we want to do is show the thing, show what is actually working, and take away what you can learn from their lessons and figure out what will make sense for you moving forward after this conference.
Great. And we're going to start those sharing of lessons and broadening the horizons, that bringing together Hawaii, California, and New Zealand. Sounds like the beginning of a walk into a bar joke, but I won't go there. But what do those 3 jurisdictions have in common? Well, everyone's committed to a clean energy, 100% clean energy over time. And how's it going? What's working? What isn't? We're going to have a great conversation about that. And to lead that, please welcome back to the stage the CEO of Elemental Accelerator, Don Lippert. Welcome, Don. Carla?
All right, well, this is my absolute pleasure. I am so lucky to sit down with these 3 wonderful leaders and partners in innovation and our ecosystem. So I'm thrilled to be able to be in a conversation with you folks. What I want to actually talk about, and we have experience from Hawaii. Jay has deep experience at the university, as well as Public Utilities Commission. Simon McKenzie is the CEO of Vector, one of our global partners at the Elemental Accelerator, and we've been working with them specifically on innovation, how to deploy things, and I just have to say I'm amazed at the speed at which you do things, especially because you always tell us, well, we're not doing things fast enough, but you're one of the fastest companies I've ever worked with, let alone utilities. And then we have Carla Peterman, who's the commissioner from the California Public Utilities Commission, who's responsible for a number of the pieces that are really sort of dogging us here in Hawaii, and we want to learn from you and your experience there. So I'd like to start off actually by asking Jay, so welcome to week 3 on the job in the Public Utilities Commission as a new commissioner. I'd like to ask you what your top priorities are for this year.
Great, thanks, Dawn. I also want to thank, my distinguished guests here. I'm looking forward to our conversation. State Energy Office for putting this on, and just the chance to talk with everyone here. As Dawn said, I've a few weeks back on the job. I'm happy to be back at the commission. And I've been asked by a lot of people, what are the priorities going forward? We have a number of major dockets, but as I look in the next 5 years, if I'm lucky to serve out this term, I really see 3 key priorities. If you look at the Hawaiian Electric's power supply improvement plans, there's proposed a major new round of procurement for utility scale projects. And this is a great time, this is a great opportunity for it's a buyer's market right now. If you look at the deals that have been struck here in Hawaii as well as on the mainland, a great opportunity in this field, but we've had some challenges with this process. At this point, we want to look forward and see how can we reform and see this next round of bidding bring in projects that are compelling deals for customers, and that on the regulatory side, we can look at and move forward on quickly. So I believe the commissioner, the chair said we're looking at kicking that, or looking forward to moving forward on those relatively soon as we get the power supply improvement plan decision out. As a last point, I also want to make sure that a key part of this will be on a broad scale throughout the state, and early community engagement will be a key part in helping make this round of projects and bidding successful. Just to touch on the other 2 quickly, the ongoing reform and transition of the distributed energy resources market and the opening up of new customer options is a lot of ongoing work at the commission, and I think we're going to bring diligence in seeing those reforms come through in the near future. And related to these 2, and especially important, I think we'll talk about a little more on our panel. In 2013 and 2014, the commission talked a lot about the reform of the utilities business model, reform of the regulatory processes, and how to better align the incentives of the existing utilities with these other opportunities I'm talking about in the beginning. So moving forward on those, all 3 of these are critical. And just a quick play, the other, we oversee the energy efficiency programs here, and continuing forward with the Hawaii Energy Program and their vision for the 2.0 version are all high priorities as I'm stepping back into this position. Thanks.
Excellent. Okay, so 3 plus 1.
3, they're all critical.
And so we're going to dig into 3 things on our conversation today. I agree, so utility procurement is key. In our conversation today, we're going to dig in specifically to the DERs and the utility business model and see what we can learn from some of the other jurisdictions you've worked in. And then finally, we're going to finish with innovation, because of course, it wouldn't be a panel that I'm moderating without touching on that. So, but I want to sort of talk through some of the DER pieces, and particularly with you, Simon, and thinking through how you think through technology. I mean, Vector has been very aggressive in actually looking at a suite of DER technologies and figuring out how your business model intersects with those technologies. Can you give us a little overview of what you've been doing there?
Yeah, look, I think first and foremost it comes down to the mindset we have, which is very much around seeing disruption as an opportunity. In New Zealand, the market is actually structurally separated, so generators and retailers are separate from the networks. We're primarily the network operators. The other element that comes into it for us is probably 2 things which colleagues hopefully understand, but we don't actually believe that regulation can protect us in the long run. I think customers are actually where the choice is at. So we've also got a massive amount of network to build in Auckland because of the expansion. We're growing about just below the rate of a lot of Chinese cities. So given that expansion, we have fundamentally focused on how can technology and solutions for customers actually enable us to not deploy what I'd call the traditional network assets, make a much smarter solution for customers, and at the same time also grow our business. So I think when we get into that space, how we approach it is obviously through relationships like with the accelerator, which we've found fantastic, engagement with other companies up in San Francisco, but also Israel, where we see a lot of tech development. And it starts with the first principle being what would a customer expect from a market, that energy hasn't really served that well. How can we actually deliver those solutions, but integrated through an offering that actually makes sense for a network as well as the customer? Right,
okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I think after we get through this first piece, I'm going to ask you to also dig into some of the technologies, because as I understand it, you guys have looked at a lot of sort of landscape of technology, and you haven't been satisfied with what you've seen, and have taken a really active role in developing some of that. So I'm going to come back to you for that. Right. But Carla, just to sort of set the stage a little bit with DERs and how you folks are thinking about the market. I know you have 3 different utilities that you're regulating in California, and they've approached DERs in slightly different ways. Can you talk about how you're approaching that?
Sure. Well, as a commission and as a state, we've been supportive of DERs, and we've incentivized energy storage at the distribution level, solar PV, electric vehicles. And what we've been doing with our utilities is distribution system planning with a focus on how do you facilitate more DERs. And in particular, when we're talking about how do you align that incentive for the utilities to invest in DERs, what we've realized, we want the utilities to see DERs as options, as an alternative to some of the traditional investment, as alternatives, for example, to distribution system investment. So we have a recent proceeding which is currently developing a pilot where the utilities are going to go out and procure DERs to meet distribution system needs, and in return for that, they will get a higher return on equity. And so we are looking at how do you make sure you're aligning that utility incentive with the market that we want to see.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So I'm coming back to DERs, and I'm curious especially because we're actually struggling with this right now in Hawaii, and in terms of how we actually control DERs. So I'm curious, in California, have you seen some interesting innovation in how to actually knit DER together as systems effectively, or is that an area where we're still looking for development?
We've seen improvements, but it's still an area where we're continuing to work on. And I think one thing is a realization that we want to have these systems connected. So it's not just about having a smart inverter or smart PV system. You want that PV system operating well with all the other loads in the household. And then the real, I think, emerging issue we're seeing is how do you coordinate what's happening with distributed energy at the distribution level with what's happening at the wholesale market. I have to applaud our grid operator, the CAISO, because they formed a working group really focused on this issue, on this interface. And with all the progress we've made on DERs, it's still remarkable the lack of visibility that the grid operator has into what's happening at the distribution system. So continuing to forge those relationships and really systematically figure out what are the rules that you have to have in place. Kind of along those lines, one of the things I'm personally working on are multi-use applications for energy storage. Because we do see opportunities for behind-the-meter energy storage to not only do bill management, but also eventually provide a distribution system resource or a wholesale resource. Turns out there's a lot of kind of rules that you have to figure out. Primacy of benefits, who's on first, who's on second. So we've been coordinating with the California ISO. We've both maintained dockets where we're identifying what are those rules. And so it's just going to take that type of coordination as we move forward to have DERs play a major role. But our behind-the-meter solar is 5,000 megawatts. So you talk about that's a massive resource. And that's 2.5 times what the San Onofre nuclear generating station was. And so really, this is not the fringe anymore. This is a resource that we've got to integrate into our broader supply planning.
Yeah, and Jay, how do you think that Hawaii sort of compares to California in this rulemaking in this market? Are we looking at California and seeing what they're doing? Are they looking at what we're doing? Are we learning from each other?
Both. And I can say I've been involved on both sides. And I agree with Commissioner Peterman in a number of areas. One, that still an area where technology is evolving, and in California and Hawaii especially, we're seeing the issue, well, and they're calling the interface between transmission and distribution. Here we just, since the system is so integrated and we don't have a system operator, it's all the system and the distribution level. We've been looking at least my calculations, at 2 to 3 times the level of distributed resource in aggregate relative to the load on the bulk power system. So we've been looking at a lot of the same technologies and companies into how to better aggregate, provide visibility, and different levels and measures of control. And the technology is definitely emerging in there, but it still remains a lot of, ultimately regulatory questions. Again, coming down to, as you look at enabling some of these smart functions at the distribution level, there's a prioritization. Do we care about if there's a system contingency? How does that interact with anything happening on the distribution circuit? So sorting through a lot of those technical questions are the same things are happening in California. In Hawaii, we have a few different working groups, tackling the exact same questions. So I think certainly paying very close attention and working with a lot of the same people. But I'm also very optimistic that we have to tackle this. We're hitting some of the kind of bulk power system constraints at the moment, and so this is an area that we're going to forge through.
Yeah, and so these are the rules piece, but technology has a huge role to play in this as well, I think, in terms of helping solve some of these challenges and address things system-wide? Because ultimately, DER is a challenge of what's disaggregated versus what plays at the system level. So, Simon, can you tell us how you guys have been thinking about that and addressing that?
Sure, yeah, well, I guess from a first point is that we actually have installed a trial platform that basically connects all the DERs in a significant area of our network. So we've connected up solar, batteries, EV chargers, hot water control circuits, and it's fully integrated into our SCADA network. It's with our technology partner out of Israel, and we're now rolling that out across the rest of our network. That'll also provide connectivity into the wholesale market, as well as any other kind of sources that's got an IP address. So from our perspective, that technology is fundamental to create the platform to coordinate all the DER, but also integrate it with our network. It has an artificial intelligence component, which I think you take a big step forward if you can actually write a lot of the rules, but what we're also finding is a lot of the customers actually determine the rules themselves. And the other element of the platform is that we can provide, right down to individual customer level that can actually talk, for an iPhone app, right the way through to a grid aggregated level. We're also working with a number of other utilities on providing that technology solution to them. So I think the really key point with this is it's not actually removing all the existing systems. This is basically a system that sits over the top of the existing system, so our SCADA system or battery control inverter connection system, anything like that, and actually talks to all those. Its origins come out of the defence industry, and put simply, it's actually now creating quite a different context about how we think about a network. It talks to all the smart meters. We've got smart meters deployed across New Zealand. And the other element which is really critical to it is probably the connectivity to the customers, but I think what's really making it, differentiating it is the fact that you can talk to market signals, you can talk to technical signals, and also customers can interface with some rule routines within it.
Yeah. So I love sort of the Kiwi understated approach that you just took to describing that, because I mean, when I heard you talk about it before, it was like, well, the Israelis had this system, which was their sort of core defense system of systems, and then we couldn't find anything that was good enough and for what we needed, and we went to Israel and we're like, hey, let's do this with energy. Can we actually be the first utility to implement this with energy and then figure out how we can roll this out across the industry? So, I mean, that's sort of my take on it, and your sort of humble, understated, well, we found this out of Israel, and here's what we're working on. Yeah. But I mean, I think that sort of approach to technology of finding the next frontier of technology to help enable the systems that we actually want to build has been really sort of fun to work with you guys on. And I'm curious too about sort of going back to this question of how you're incentivized to deploy something like this. So can you just talk quickly about sort of the structure of your business and how you think about DERs there?
Yeah, so I mean, very much obviously we have 10 different parts to our business. We've got the regulated side, which is essentially the networks, and then we've got unregulated. Smart metering sits in the unregulated side because in New Zealand it was a retail-led solution. We're also deploying that in Australia at the moment. But fundamentally, from a regulatory perspective, our regulator has just gone through the process of setting the input methodologies, which obviously determine how our structure works. We don't have any financial incentive per se, so we don't get a different level of return for undertaking these. We look at it more from a risk-based approach of saying, but probably the biggest frustration is we just do not want to end up investing in 40-year life assets anymore. The rate of growth and the change of technology just doesn't make sense to us. So we're incentivized from a risk perspective to lower the cost exposure in the regulated side, provide those technology solutions. They have obviously a better depreciation schedule, so we can get some accelerated depreciation from the regulator. Other than that, the incentive is more from being listed about how do we grow and actually by building these types of solutions take them to other markets.
So that takes us right into sort of the business of being a utility, and that was Jay's third priority. And I want to ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10 in each of your geographies and markets, where do you think you lie in the public policy goals of the geography in alignment with the financial incentives of the utilities that serve them. So Carla, I'll start with you, and then we'll head down the line.
I would say overall I give us a 7, but it does vary depending on what type of technology or what you're trying to encourage. So we've been very successful with the deployment, particularly of large-scale renewables, and our utilities are on track to surpass our renewable portfolio standard. We have a target of 50% by 2030. Already San Diego Gas and Electric is at 40-something%. So I think you've seen good alignment there. As I was mentioning earlier on distributed energy resources, I think there's still work to do. In addition to getting the utilities to see DERs as alternatives to their current investments, we still need to continue to address concerns around cost shift. Given the way we incentivize DERs, we want to make sure that the customers who don't utilize them don't bear an unfair burden of those costs, and that's something that we're continuing to work on.
Yeah. I'm on a scale of 1 to 10.
Yeah, look, I think the New Zealand context is kind of characterised by generation retail being separated from the network side. I think that's quite an important context. I think the biggest ways that we see it is that as it stands at the moment, the regulatory construct is enabling us to invest, which is positive. The flip side is it's not, for want of a better word, prohibiting people carrying off what we call dumb investment. So we still see a lot of people in the market that are incentivised to just keep pouring in as much capital as they like, and they have a belief system they're going to be protected for 40 years. And then the second element is that they don't actually think that customers are going to revolt against them, which we don't think is credible nowadays. So I think in the regulatory construct, we should move back to a model which essentially looks at the type of investment that's occurring and actually saying, well, you can move to a much smarter technology space.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you a 3 to an 8.
Yeah.
3 for investing in dumb things, and 8 or 9 for having incentives and ability to invest in the things that you think are future-proof and future-focused.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Don, I'm going to duck trying to put a number on this, but I'm going to
figured
say
you
I'm
would.
very optimistic about where we're headed. And we're just having a conversation outside about it. When this discussion really took hold in Hawaii, I think one of the and there was a lot of interest in moving towards a incentive performance-based framework. There was still a significant disagreement among all stakeholders on really the direction of the utility, the focus of investments. And so from our working as staff at the time, it's really hard to enable that framework if you don't really have a clear idea where you want to go and what are the right types of investment. An essential element is trying to establish a revenue cap based on some understanding of those types of investment. So I think that dynamic has certainly improved and changed, and I think at the same time, a lot of the discussions in other states and jurisdictions has evolved on how to enable and incentivize and have utilities look at third-party provided DER type resources and enable these frameworks. So I think we at the time I think we're ahead in a lot of ways, and now we've been able to we have the opportunity to learn, and that's exactly where I think the chair in a number of times has referred to opening up and looking more into making advances in the performance-based and incentive-based regulation. And so again, it's a shared priority here. And I think if you look at the dialogue in some of the various dockets, there's a move from the utilities as well as the other stakeholders to move in this direction.
Yeah, so I guess that's the question of like how we move in new directions, and to me, like that's where the innovation piece comes in. Because when I talk about innovation, it's not sort of what's the flashiest new gadget or what else can we do. It's actually how do we move people toward trying new things and testing new things and taking the kinds of risks we want them to take. So how do we define those risks and then create incentives so people can move in that direction? And Simon, you guys have actually thought about this from sort of a people perspective of how do you create incentives for your people to take the kinds of risks you want to take. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about that, and then we could talk about overall, if there were no constraints from the regulatory side, what would you guys actually want to see the utilities doing in terms of innovation and risk taking?
Yeah, I guess from our perspective, the whole focus has been on 2 key elements. One is around we see the biggest skill set for this century is around creativity and having an inquisitive mindset. Have a belief system that there's got to be much better ways looking outside of our industry and saying, what would happen if the likes of Uber or other businesses, how can you adopt their models into what we're doing? The dialogue with customers has been really important because, they actually got a real hunger to actually deploy technology. it's led to things like peer-to-peer trading solutions that we've put in place. I think that we've also obviously had to change the business. We've got a huge amount now of much more, a whole chief digital officer, brought a lot of digital capability into the business. But right across the business, it's not like we're saying one specific area is responsible for innovation. Everyone in the business is responsible for it, to whether it's someone in the comms department right the way through to accounting. So I think that's a really critical dimension. And the other lens which has been really important is looking through what's known as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and actually saying you can't look at our business through a lens of just what's been done historically in energy. You've got to have a much wider lens about affordability, social issues, and probably about 9 of the Sustainable Development Goals put out by the UN, and that's really changed the mindset.
Interesting. What would you like to see if there weren't constraints in terms of how the utilities approach innovation and risk-taking?
First, I want to acknowledge that our utilities do a tremendous amount of investment in research and development, and there are great innovations coming out of the utility. But I think it is important to make sure there are so many innovators out there that aren't working for utilities, and wanting to have utilities establish a marketplace and a forum in which those innovations can come forward and succeed. So there's no constraint on this, but one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of the innovators, new technology, look at energy storage, for example. People have great ideas, great projects, but they don't know how to actually work in terms of the utility procurement. That scale of engagement requires a really steep learning curve to understand how to execute those utility contracts, how to meet the different timelines, how to deal with interconnection. So when we did our energy storage targets, the first solicitation that Edison did for local reliability, every applicant, every bidder that bid in a proposal, the utility had to work with directly on their proposal. No proposal was perfect. And we had proposals from established companies and new startups. And I have to applaud the utility for frankly hand-holding the different applicants to say, this is what we need from you. And so that's something that they are positioned to do that we can't do as the regulator. We can set the procurement target, but ultimately you're going to need that type of one-on-one connections to help people ramp up. And so that's what I would encourage. What we can do as a regulator, and what they can also do, is have looser, more, I would consider it, requirements in the beginning of deployment of new technologies. So in the first energy storage RFOs, we had looser rules around site control. Applicants didn't have to have site control in order to bid into the process. As we are maturing in terms of our understanding of procurement in that area, some of those rules are tightening. And so I think it's important for utilities to really think about what type of risk they're willing to bear versus what type of risk should be put on new developers and new market entrants in order to allow them to really flourish.
So you came full circle back to utility procurement like that.
Always.
Well,
the first one.
Just a couple.
Yeah,
I mean, I think
innovation.
we're, in a number of ways, we're seeing tremendous innovation here already. I mean, it's the high energy prices and the needs for grid integration. If you look at what Kauai has done, the kind of pushing the boundaries on how to operate, relatively decent sized grid with large amounts of solar, and they've continually broken new boundaries, and their new goal is to turn off all their synchronous generators during the day and run entirely with solar. And very few places in the world, particularly with a decent amount of customer base, willing to take that risk, and they keep forging ahead. Throughout the state, the Hawaiian Electric companies have been strong partners with Don's program as well as others in pushing the technology side. And just, I think, as Commissioner Peterman said, as we establish and unlock and create the right market structures, we're going to see tremendous innovation on the customer side. We've already seen the first wave of growth in rooftop solar PV, and I think just shows the customer choice paradigm when you get the mix right. I mean, we just see growth faster and in ways that we'd never intended or expected in the beginning. And so all makes me very optimistic and happy to be in this position to help move this along.
Well, we're happy that you're in this position too. And now our rapid fire final question, in 5 words or less, what's one thing you could use help with? Jay, I'll start with you and come back.
Sure, managing expectations. I think all that optimism, it's also not going to happen overnight, right? As I put it, probably no single order from the commission will create all this change. So I think having some understanding expectation that some of these things do take time, and time invested in the beginning actually helps you get to where you want to go faster.
Excellent.
I guess from my perspective, we're just always hungry to learn from others and really having that mindset to actually connect with other parties, whether it's back in New Zealand to see what we do, but what we can learn from others, and obviously access technologies that can really assist us.
Helping us make sure that the technologies that we're investing in this future is accessible to everyone. One example of technology I really like is programmable thermostats to help with energy efficiency. And we're excited about a new research project, which is about how do you make those thermostats actually work without Wi-Fi so people don't have Wi-Fi can access them. It's a simple thing, but it really is going to bring in a big part of the population that doesn't have access to some of the advanced technologies into this energy world. So that's what we could use help with.
Awesome. Let's do it. The time is now. Please join me in thanking our panelists.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, panel. It's all right. I have known this next gentleman for a long time and have been in awe of his ability to build amazing, enduring things, starting with, oh, by the way, Earth Day, 1970, and more recently, one of the most iconic buildings from the standpoint of energy resource use, comfort, wellness, that has become the model, as you're about to see, of what buildings need to be. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the president of the Bullitt Foundation, Denis Hayes.
Hey, buddy. So, good morning. Whenever anybody gets up to talk to you, it's a pretty good idea to try to find out where he's coming from, so I'm going to spend a minute at the beginning talking about my background just a bit. This is pretty much where I grew up. It's about 8 miles from my house. By the time I was 10 or 11, Buzzy Farrell and I would ride our bicycles up there a few times every summer. That little rock in the middle is Beacon Rock, which we would climb to the top of. And it is some of the most spectacular scenery in the world. I've probably visited 120 or 130 countries by now and never found anything that moves me more than this scene. This is the actual town that I grew up in. That's the paper mill that dominated it. As I was growing up, there were no pollution control laws or pollution controls of any kind, so it poured its effluent into the river, and we would occasionally go down there to go fishing, and there'd be 10,000 dead salmon. Poured sulfur dioxide and hydrogen sulfide out of those stacks that rotted our roofs and pitted our cars and destroyed our lungs. Until I left home, I woke up every single morning with a sore throat. And that beautiful land that I went to visit was clear-cut. I mean, you'd be camping someplace surrounded by lush greenery and wildlife and go back the next summer and there would be literally hundreds of square miles of bare dirt eroding away. And that was not uncommon. That was simply the way that we did business. Each generation sort of thinks of the land that it grew up in as normal, but the land that I grew up in was this. This is Pittsburgh 3 years after I graduated from high school. It's the sort of thing that we think of with Shenzhen or New Delhi, Mexico City. This is Los Angeles. Again, 3 years after I graduated from high school, you could not, on a bad day, see one block down the street. When we look down our noses at developing countries that sometimes have pretty serious air pollution problems, it's important to remember that it was not that long ago that this was us. And one of the things, I'd like to think the big thing that changed it, was an outpouring of public concern, of public outrage in 1970. At that point, 20 million Americans, 1 million of them in New York City alone, as this picture in the New York Times shows a portion of, standing up and demanding fundamental changes in the way that America does business. This was the first time that I've ever climbed up on a stage 80 feet high, looked out over a crowd, and it was like climbing up on a lifeguard stand and looking out over the ocean. The people stretched back further than the eye could see. This is the sort of stuff that everybody said about me then. I was called angry. I think part of that has to do with my Czech-Irish facial composition. Bill Clinton, when he's neutral, looks like you've just told him the funniest joke he's ever heard. When I'm neutral, I kind of look like you just insulted my wife. But in any case, I was thought to be very angry, and I guess I actually was pretty angry. In the first 5 years after Earth Day, these are the things that happened. I'm not going to read through it because there is nothing more boring than somebody reading to you something that you can read for yourself. But it is The first 5 years, and if I'd taken the first 10 years, it would have filled up another slide. It was until 1980 that we were really on a roll. And these things have fundamentally transformed the American economy, American culture, American values. We have professions now that didn't exist then, academic disciplines that didn't exist then. People are choosing their cars based upon environmental values. They're choosing their diets based on environmental values. Many of us chose to have 1 or 2 children based upon environmental values. I can think of nothing in American history that has changed the nation more than those 10 years, with the possible exception of the New Deal. And that was led by an enormously popular president coming out of the Great Depression. This was led by citizens rising up and demanding change. I think it's probably on the order of $100 trillion in pure economic terms of net benefits since then. The only really thorough assessment that I've seen of any of that legislation was the Clean Air Act. It was arguably the most sweeping. The costs were approximately $1 trillion over the first 40 years. The benefits were approximately $23 trillion, so the net benefits of $22 trillion from that one piece of legislation. So with that background, this is a little bit about my journey from being an environmental firebrand to a real estate developer. It shocked many of my friends, but it was not the real estate that you often think of, where it's superficial things that are simply trying to separate people from their money. What we built was this. This is the Bullitt Center. It's right smack in the middle of Seattle on Capitol Hill, and a fairly stunning building in many ways. Once again, I'm not going to read the whole list to you because you can read it more rapidly yourself, but it is the only, I think still, the only 6-story building in the world that is truly net energy positive from sunbeams hitting its roof. And it's in the cloudiest major city in the contiguous 48 states, which leads to a reasonable question. What's up, Honolulu? It's the most energy efficient building in the world, 1/3 the energy per square foot of the second most efficient building in Seattle. The average water use in commercial buildings in Seattle is 28 gallons per square foot per year. Bullitt's use last year was 1.06 gallons per square foot per year. In area after area, physically, we have tried to make this building one that if all the buildings in the world were built like this, the environmental problems from the built environment would effectively disappear. We eliminated 362 common building materials that are toxic, carcinogenic, mutagenic, endocrine disrupting. We just got them out. Spent a person year at that point having to evaluate the materials. Now there are a whole bunch of things like Declare that you can go to and find those materials quite easily. Construction costs, $355 a square foot. That's not cheap, but it is lower than the median construction cost of Class A office buildings in Seattle. It has been constantly fully leased at market rates. It has a rate of return that is higher than many of the other components in the foundation's portfolio of investments. It is not a dump. I mean, we can't argue that solar panels are as cheap as asphalt shingles, but we made a whole series of precise choices. We don't have any Carrara marble. We don't have any granite countertops. We don't have any Chihuly sculptures. What we did was we invested in deep efficiency in a building that is still quite striking, and although it doesn't have marble, it has some wood in it that is pretty amazing. I was embarrassed this morning as I looked at these slides to see that those lights are on over the table. The photographer turned them on. They're LEDs that feed into a fiber network. They only draw 10 watts, but those lights are never on because this is so well lit from daylighting. And here are a few more slides. I'm now sort of saying, okay, we've touched all the environmental bases. We've touched the economic basis and passed those tests. What it's actually like to be in this building as a tenant? What's it like to live in a living building? And as you can see, it's pretty comfortable. This is sort of the alternative. You walk into a standard Class A office building through the front door, and what you see, it's a bank of elevators. If you look really hard, someplace there may be a door that leads to a stairway, and you pass through the door and it's dark, it's murky, it smells a little bit. If you're a woman, you may be uncomfortable climbing it. You go up 2 or 3 stories, you get there and the door is locked, and you go back downstairs and climb in an elevator and go up. It is not designed to promote walking. This is something that I take great pride. I created the idea and the branding for it. It's called an Irresistible Stairway. It's filled with light. It's surrounded by glass, and when you walk in the front door of the building, this is what is drawn to you. If you want to use the elevator, you have to go through a door. Now, it's a pretty easy door to go through. It's got the little pedal down there that you can touch if you're in a wheelchair. If you've got a heavy load or if you're disabled, there's absolutely no problem to get on the elevator and go to wherever you're going. But the default, the behavior that naturally more than 90% of the trips in the building is on the stairway, saves a fairly trivial amount of energy. Our elevator is very efficient and it's regenerative, but it makes people healthy. I mean, we grew up the first couple 100,000 years chasing gazelles over the African savanna. Now we are trying to avoid climbing one flight of stairs. That's bad for us, and we tried to build this building in a way that is really good for the tenants. There again is the stairway. One of the things that happens in this building is that it has a brain, a nervous system, a musculature, bones, it even has an alimentary canal. It is like an organism. On a hot summer night, when it got a little bit warm in the building, at 9 o'clock at night, all of the windows pop out 6 inches. The air inside the building goes out the top of the window because it's warm, and it goes, and the cooler air outside comes in through the bottom, and it sets up a natural convective current, replaces all the air in the building with cooler air, cools down the 3 inches of concrete on the floor. But it also, if you happen to leave papers on your desk, it blows those papers all over the place. So lifestyle changes in a living building, you actually have to put a paperweight on your this is an interesting thing. I got this from somebody. I gave a talk at a conference, and he gave me that as a prize. I think he was trying to be nice, but it turns out that is fossilized dinosaur dung. I think this is a guy who had a limited understanding of metaphors when he had his prize. The other thing that happens on those summer days when it's going to be a little bit hot is our exterior Venetian blinds deploy. Now, the computer in the basement knows where the sun is on the sky at every hour of every day of the year because it's always in the same place. What it doesn't know is whether it's cloudy, whether it's hot, because it's just a computer down in the basement. The nervous system tells them what's the outside temperature, what's the inside temperature, how bright, how intense is the sunlight. Is it raining? Is the wind blowing? And if so, from what direction and how fast? All that stuff feeds in. And on that hot summer day, as the sun is going across a clear sky, these blinds deploy on the outside of the building and stop the sun from penetrating the glass. American Venetian blinds are essentially always inside the glass, and that's too late. The sun's already inside. The right place to put Venetian blinds is on the outside. You visit Berlin, and a great many places, including the Bundestag, have their Venetian blinds on the outside. Very small thing, but an important one. This is, before we poured the concrete on the floor, this is the radiant heating system, and a little bit in a really hot summer, radiant cooling system. We can put some cold water through it as well on hot days. And the lifestyle change. In the winter, many of us, including those feet there that belong to me, go into our stocking feet because it's just so nice to have that warmth underneath. It's a lifestyle improvement. These are the composters in the basement. We don't send anything to a sewage treatment plant. We treat all of our sewage ourselves. Those blue tubes coming up maintain a constant negative pressure so that in a bathroom, if you do something that is very smelly, it is not smelly for the person that comes in 30 seconds later because the negative pressure has sucked it all down. We have foaming toilets that make things, if you will, slippery and let them go down 6 stories. It's the only 6-story building as well with only composting toilets. That's among things that kept me awake at night during construction. That was one of them. You do not want stuff to go down 3 stories and stop. We haven't had any of those problems. The foaming toilets use very, very little water. I mean, a typical low flush toilet, at the cutting edge, 1.2 gallons. Our typical flush is about 3/4 of a cup of water. So that explosive force of a gallon of water splashing rapidly into a toilet sends all sorts of microorganisms out into the atmosphere. The foaming toilet, everything is just taken care of by gravity and by the negative air pressure, and there's none of those health problems that are associated with it. I think these are actually superior in every way to, but you can't use them with a centralized sewage treatment facility. You got to have enough water if you're going to be shipping this stuff 10 miles to a sanitary sewer. But if you're going to do it in your basement, this is the way to do it. And that's just a close-up of a foaming toilet. I had this in an animated form, and I lacked the technical competence to do it, but you can get the sense of what this is like. Actually, I tell clients, I think this is okay, we're all adults here. Think of yourself when you go to the toilet as like a World War II bombardier. You got a target there, let's see if you can hit it. But the most important thing is wait for 30 or 45 seconds until you've got the foam there. Once you've got the foam, then you've got the slipperiness that makes everything go. If you go in at the very last minute and discharge immediately, you can leave some skid marks behind. Other things that you have to do to really play with us and help us sail the ship, you have to walk, bicycle, or use transit or lift. If you have to bring a car in, there are parking lots a couple blocks away, but the building does not have a parking place for automobiles. Use the irresistible stairs. Again, nothing that forces you to, but people do it by default. Put paperweights on papers, especially in the summer. It has an open office layout that's necessary for the daylighting. Some people don't like that, especially for the first month or two when they get in. Those are probably all of the major negatives of a building that gets all of its energy from sunlight that hits its roof, all of its water from the rain that hits it, and has no toxic things in it. These are some of the nice parts of it. It's a better quality light. It's the full spectrum that we all evolved as a species to use. It changes over the course of the day as the sun changes its position on the horizon and goes through greater and lesser amounts of the atmosphere. And one thing that we didn't know, nobody anticipated, is seasonal affective disorder, which is very common in Seattle, disappears for people in the Bullitt Center. When you've got natural daylighting, it goes away. Has fresher air. It's the most comfortable building in the summer and the winter. There's never any time when you stand next to a window and feel like you're frying and move inside 15 feet and feel like you're freezing, because we don't have any air conditioning. It maintains its comfort through natural design. Zero toxics, reduced sick leave, increased productivity, no smells in the toilet. And for those of you familiar with walkscore.com, which tells you how convenient any location is to all of the essentials of life, we've got a walkscore.com score of 99 out of 100. It's convenient to everything. That's the end of my formal talk. I want to spend, since I've got the microphone here and Joel is telling me to cut it off, 1 second or 2 seconds or 15 seconds to say, 2020 will be the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. We have, if you remember those slides of Pittsburgh and Los Angeles, made some incredible progress on a number of issues inside the United States. We are in worse shape in a vast array of global problems than we were back in 1970. And it's my hope that Earth Day in 2020 will last a month, that it will involve at least 180 nations, and that every person in this room will be involved in putting together something that makes clear to the world what it is that we can do if we all do our best. Thank you very much.
Great. Okay, my fellow World War II bombardiers, or whatever the term is. Oh, come on up, we're going to do a panel. Speaking of, I guess that, it just doesn't matter, sit there. And color balance, we're kind of nice this way. We're going to talk about energy, security, resilience, security in general. And I love the sort of the makeup of this conversation. We have on one hand the Chief Information Officer for Command Control and Communications and Cyber Director for PACCOM, the U.S. Pacific Command, and a legendary game developer and entrepreneur and the CEO of Blue Planet Energy, and just a great leader in environmental, everything environmental here in the islands. Resilience is one of these words that gets used seemingly a lot more these days than before. I'm not sure that everybody is on the same page of what it actually means. Randy, start, what does resilience mean at PACCOM?
Well, I think the reason why resiliency is used more and more is because it's more and more important. As we depend more and more on information systems, on interconnected systems, those systems have to operate in many different situations. Many situations are pretty harsh. So resiliency is the ability of a system to be able to continue to operate and continue to do its function in almost any condition You can't just expect there to be nice, calm conditions all the time. We have storms, we have disasters. And so resiliency is the ability for that system or service or whatever to keep operating and perform that function. And so it requires a lot of design and pre-planning in order to ensure systems are resilient.
Or as my retired Marine friend Mark Mickleby says, it's the ability to take a gut punch and come back swinging.
Absolutely. In fact, the Marine Corps has something called adapt, improvise, and overcome, and that's a pretty good three terms for resiliency.
Yeah. Hank, resilience, what does that mean?
Yeah, so resilience, I come from a country where the Netherlands, which is about a third of it's below sea level. Resilience is the ability to get through a natural disaster and come back and then rebuild in a way that the next time you have a natural disaster, it doesn't damage you as much as the last one did. So resilience is not just about the ability to recover, it's about the way that you recover in a way that you're stronger the next time. And with sea level rise and with these king tides, I think king tides are going to be the norm. And
explain what a king tide is for those who don't know.
So if you have the combination of the sun and the moon pulling at the ocean at the same time, then you get an extreme high tide. If you combine that with sea level rise, high tides, or the highest tides are going to get higher and higher and higher.
And you add a storm into that.
And you add a storm into that, a low pressure center. If you put a low pressure center, that rises sea level even more. And that's what happened in Holland in 1953, and about a quarter of the Netherlands was underwater. And it isn't something that needs to be solved with sandbags, because you're going to have sandbags there all the time. You need to have a much more permanent solution. And Hawaii needs to wake up to the fact that these things are not going to be exceptional. They're going to be the norm going forward. And the other side of it is like superstorms. I mean, with Sandy, in the South Pacific, we had the big typhoon that never happened before. These places are not prepared because they're getting hit with the 1,000-year storm every couple of years. Yeah. And again, we have to build systems, power, whatever, so that we can come back from those kinds of situations.
Right. And it's not just the hard infrastructure. Randy, you work on cybersecurity, big part of resilience. And talk a little about how, from the PACOM, Pacific Command perspective, you think about resilience there. Is that just for the military itself, or for the Hawaiian Islands, or for a larger area? What are you thinking about when you're thinking about cybersecurity at PACOM?
Well, cybersecurity and resiliency, one of the things we're thinking about is military forces and Pacific Command depend heavily on civilian infrastructure. And so we actually have an effort called Pacific Security Support Strategy in order to support where we can civilian industry in order to provide power systems, any kind of information systems that the public provides, make sure that they are robust and can support storms or any kind of disaster, or be there when the military needs them. In fact, we have kind of four elements of resiliency. We try to kind of measure what makes it resilient, what is not resilient. One of the things we have is robustness. Robustness is the ability of a system to be just tough and handle any situation. For example, when you talk about robustness, a Honda Civic is not as robust as a Humvee, or a car is not as robust as a tank. And of course, we are in the business of defending the nation, and so we have to be there when the rest of industry, rest of commercial, or anyone else is not there. Industry depends on us, commercial education depends on us, so we want to create a situation that can continue to operate. So you have robustness, you have redundancy, you have dispersal, you have the ability to restore and then recover, as Hank just said, come back up to a normal situation. So as such, in any system that we look at, information systems, cybersecurity systems, we build that in. There's no single points of failure. We have undersea cable systems that are there to withstand a certain amount of strain. We ensure they're buried so that fishing lines don't drag against them. They're strong enough. Of course, nothing can withstand a big earthquake, but at least some of the standard, tugs of tides and ocean those cable systems are there to
So all those things that you described about cybersecurity and resilience, really, by and large, around redundance and depth and adaptability and things like that, really apply to resilience and infrastructure and all. Hank, what's the conversation about resilient infrastructure that should be taking place in Hawaii, and how much of it actually is?
Wow. Yeah, so there's been talk about tying the islands together with a cable, and literally trying to tie them together, and
because would they float away? What is that for?
It's just for power and communications.
Oh,
I guess.
That kind of tie.
That kind of thing.
Right, you said cable, and I was like, okay.
So
hold on.
Yeah. So the issue with that is that those cables become single points of failure,
right.
And so if you are completely dependent on the power coming from a neighbor island and you're all of a sudden cut off, now you're having a problem. The solutions that I like to see is first of all, island independence. And when I say islands independence, we have 26 days of fuel in the islands.
You mean a reserve on a typical?
Yeah, and so if the tanker stopped coming in 26 days, we're out of gas, so to speak. And this is in a situation where we can actually be producing most of that ourselves. 40% of the oil that we import goes to electricity, which is kind of ridiculous. Jet fuel, everybody says it's off the table when it should be on the table. And ground transportation, Norway is going to go 100% by 2045. We can completely switch our ground transportation by, as far as I'm concerned, 2025.
So how much of that conversation is taking place? Is this? I mean,
we are having the conversation now, and it's funny. The resistance is coming from strange places, like the auto industry. If the legislators around the world were to make a decision, we don't want internal combustion engines, then the auto industry would all pivot and make electric and hydrogen cars. We can generate electricity through wind, solar, geothermal here in the islands, and so there would be no problem. There would be no needed import for any of that. So for security issues for the military, for example, if they were to switch over to hydrogen and electric, then they wouldn't need to import. And in forward locations, to bring gasoline, diesel, and all that stuff to the forward location costs a fortune.
And costs lives, too.
And it costs lives, and they have to protect those supply lines when it could be generated locally. And this goes for every island in the world. Electricity needs to be generated locally. Every island has different resources. I don't think there's any island that doesn't have any resources.
Yeah.
And if the island doesn't have enough land, you can go offshore and do offshore wind or wave or whatever.
Yeah. So, Randy, we talk as we have been here at this event about resiliency in the context of sustainability. They've become not synonymous at all, although some people I think actually do conflate them a little bit. But the reality is that not everything that's sustainable is resilient, and not everything that's resilient is sustainable. And so there's a balancing act there in terms of how do you, so for example, if everybody had a diesel generator on the premises, residential, commercial, then the grid going down wouldn't be so much of a problem. That's not very sustainable, cost-wise and other things. How do you think about balancing that? Where do you see that? Is that a tension point that you have? And I'd love to hear from you as well, Hank, on this, in terms of how do you pit one against the other?
I don't know. I think that I do actually think sustainability is part of resiliency. It's just a longer term matter of it. If you're, if you have 30 days of fuel in a generator system, to support a headquarters, for example, if you have a power outage, okay, so yeah, you're resilient. You've taken care of that situation. So you've taken care of the initial fault, but you still have that issue of recoverability and sustainment. And so you have to still maintain the mission. So it's just, I would say, a slow motion. Maintaining sustainability is slow motion, maintaining resilience.
So you don't see a tension point?
I really don't see the tension.
Hank?
No.
Yeah, I mean, I don't look at them as being different either. Sustainable resilience is, we could say, resilience of the human race living on this planet has everything to do with sustainability. If we don't learn how to live sustainable, then we're not going to be resilient. We're not going to be around. The planet will just get rid of us, like our speaker yesterday said.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit, because one of the technologies that is talked about by some as essential to a carbon-free energy world is nuclear. And Randy, you're a former nuclear engineer. I know you've thought a lot about this, and there's a whole new generation of smaller scale nuclear generation technologies. Should that be more of the conversation? That really hasn't come up so much this week at VERGE Hawaii. Should that be?
Oh yeah, I'm a big believer in nuclear power, and I know that's I'm in a minority because nuclear power has got such a stigma. But you mentioned sustainability. Nuclear submarine can operate for 30 years without refueling. And in fact, it's basically the entire lifetime of the ship is built without having to refuel. Aircraft carriers all use reactors. So no, I'm a believer that with nuclear power, it can be made safe and sustainable. And I'm not, not an expert on this, but even with all renewables, with solar and wind, I'm not sure we can generate enough energy in order to replace the fossil fuels. But I think combined with nuclear, it can. And it's interesting, there are some new technologies in nuclear power that are struggling, and I don't know if they're struggling because they don't have the support. But for example, these pebble bed modular reactors, the fuel is actually in billiard ball size pellets, and the actual reactor itself is sort of a container, and you refuel by rotating these pellets. The moderator is gas, and then the gas is heated and it heats steam, and then from that point on, it's a normal generator.
There's no spent fuel, and there's no
if you lose cooling, the fuel cells are strong enough to maintain their integrity, so they wouldn't melt or anything. And I think there's a lot of promise to that. I know South Africa, China, and MIT has been working on that, but it hasn't reached the point where it can be publicly used.
Hank, I'm guessing you have a different view on this.
How did you guess? Yeah, so I'm not a Luddite. I'm not afraid of technology, but I do know that there is this thing called Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, and more recently Fukushima. And specifically Fukushima, because it happened very recently, it feels like, and the Japanese people feel this very strongly, that the government and the utility has been lying to them about what actually happened there and what's going on consistently. And so the question is, what happens at the end of life of the utility? What happens to all of who takes care of all these reactors and all of the spent fuel rods? It may be a solution on some parts of the world, but if we're talking about an island, if something goes wrong, there is no way we can evacuate. Fukushima or Chernobyl, we can actually move away, but we have 800,000 people on this island. How long does it take us to get all those people out of here? And the answer is we can't. And so as far as island resiliency is concerned, I don't think this is a good solution unless you lend us a submarine and park it offshore. We can tow it away when something hits a fan. I like the idea of encapsulating it in some structure that is not tied to the ground.
Well, is there, and I haven't really thought this through, but I'm sure some others have a nuclear submarine version of the electric vehicles serving as battery storage to the grid. Can you literally park a nuclear plant offshore?
Oh, that's interesting. But we literally, have reactors that we carry around the world in submarines and aircraft carriers. So perhaps there is something associated with that. You put a floatable reactor that it is offshore. Yeah. Now, then all of a sudden, how are you going to get the power onshore? So obviously, it has to be moored. But I think most of the effort should probably be put into containment facilities, so that if something did happen, that any kind of radioactivity could be contained. So that's interesting, but I'm not sure as far as getting the power actually connected to the grid would be. In fact, what's interesting is during the Hurricane Iniki at Kauai, as you know, the Navy actually sent a submarine, USS Indianapolis, to Kauai to power the island, because the grid was totally destroyed. well, not totally destroyed, but obviously they were out of power and very heavily damaged. We're never able to actually connect the submarine to the grid, plus the grid was too badly damaged to work. But at least we were considering doing that, and that option was there.
Hank, you were going to...
Yeah, no, first of all, I think that there's enough solar and wind to power the entire planet. I've heard, I don't know the facts, but that there isn't enough uranium in the world to power the world with uranium. So it isn't the final solution, no matter how we look at it. But you know, we have a very strong regulatory environment in this country. And so we could theoretically say, yeah, we are doing a pretty good job of watching the nukes in this country. But you go to other countries, like what if they built nuclear power plants in India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Syria? You know, what do you do?
Yeah.
And then there are conflicts, and then these things become targets. I just as soon not have centralized, how can I say, targets.
Yeah.
And you know, what happens when you have a wind spill or a solar spill? And the answer is absolutely nothing, because there's no such thing. Yeah. You know, but oil spill and a nuclear spill are like disasters.
Isn't a wind spill kind of like a hurricane or something?
If you could provide enough solar for the whole world.
Do we have Randy's mic? Bring that back up.
Nope.
Go ahead.
I'll just use this.
All right. Well,
somebody's coming. Help is on the way.
Is help on the way? Well, here's. There you go. Help is here. Let's see if we can get this.
Oh, get unplugged. There you go. Testing. I think you're on.
Okay.
And we're back.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if we could provide the world with solar power, I'd be all for it. But you know, I'm not sure we can. So.
Yeah. So, what keeps you guys up at night thinking in terms of security and resilience in Hawaii? Who wants to go first on that?
Well, I guess one of the big worries I do have is cyber hacking. Is an adversary, with enough malware in control systems to be able to take over control systems. One of the things, that I understand from Hawaiian Electric, they're not connected to the internet, and I think they have a very strong security posture. So, I mean, I don't really stay up at night thinking about Hawaiian Electric, but I do stay up at night thinking about other places that could be impacted as such. And by the way, all the power plants that I know of that have been intruded upon, hacked, are connected to the internet. So,
yeah, I mean, we're seeing that now, the potential to bring down the grid or a portion of it is becoming more and more real as we're seeing what's coming out of Russia and North Korea and, who knows, in whatever part of the United States this may be coming. But are we able to island it off, small island this off in terms of being able to just, because the one part of the grid is like the internet, is that it's so interconnected by definition that if part of it goes, it all goes.
Yeah, I think we can. In fact, I think the internet is actually almost a convenience for lazy people who don't know how to connect. I'm being a little provocative here, who don't want to spend money on independent telecommunications. I think if we perhaps need a control and actuator telecommunication system like the internet that's dedicated to providing industrial control systems control, everything's encrypted so that there is no human beings that are operating and messing around in there. Everything on there has to be control signal. And so I think that would go a long way. And if we don't have one that's ubiquitously established, at least one established amongst partnerships.
So using technology to take the human element out of grid security is what we want to do.
Right. I mean, our threats are natural threats. Our threats are, just technological material failure threats. But our biggest threats, frankly, are human being threats, who are folks who are out to do us harm.
I want to get to a question in a second, but Hank, what do you think?
Yeah. So I believe the future of power, of energy is distributed generation. If you have distributed generation, it's like if there are 1,000 places where we're generating instead of 2 or 1, then we wouldn't have the problem of having to protect that one. It's like don't put all of your eggs in one basket. And the more eggs you have, the less damage that any one of those eggs failing can can cause. And if you interconnect the little microgrids and the power drivers in different places, then it's just like borrowing sugar from your neighbor. If you run out of sugar, it's not that big of a deal.
And once you have eggs and sugar, then you're halfway to
then we
a
have
cake.
pancakes.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Sorry. Elaine, what do we got?
Yeah, so questions about, I mean, you were talking about cybersecurity and a number of other things in terms of integrating DERs more securely. So are you guys making any investments in blockchain technology? Or what are your thoughts on blockchain, the blockchain?
I don't even know what that is. Blockchain technology?
It's a blockchain.
I've been hearing a lot about this, and it has to do with like Bitcoin, of being able to produce something that is not hackable. And that's how, and because it's not hackable, basically it's secure. So your money is in virtual reality, and nobody can hack it. That kind of thing.
But it's also a way of ensuring transactions of any kind, including renewable energy purchases, even down to the neighbor-to-neighbor level, and ensuring the provenance of that if something is coming through that's supposed to be renewable, it probably is, and things like that.
It's interesting, but it's not our problem. Not my problem right now. What I'd like to see is people becoming more energy independent. Yeah. It's probably something for the electric company, but the electric company is connected to everybody, so they have to protect their system anyway.
Yeah, well, this is really, by definition, complex and multi-layered topic. I wish we could spend more time really digging into some of the specific solutions, but adaptability, redundancy, diversity, decentralization, whether it's of data or whether it's of energy, are the key words here, and how we get there and make sure that we've baked that into whatever energy plan we're creating for Hawaii or anywhere else is the critical.
I think what we need to do is look into the future. What is Hawaii going to look like 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now? Where is the sea level going to be? What's the worst case scenario? Yeah. Right now, what we're talking about, the IPCC says minimum of a meter of rise in sea level by the end of the century. That's minimum. Yeah. And if we build for minimum, what happens when it's medium or maximum, which we haven't even figured that out. Yeah. I think we need to all work together. I mean, everybody, not just Hawaii, but everybody, to avert the tipping point of climate change. If it goes too far, then we could be talking about 30 feet rise in sea level. Where do we go?
Yeah. Well, we'll leave it at that, bringing everyone together to have this conversation and to make sure that everyone's at the table, and how we think about that is one of the core themes of this event and of Hawaii's journey on the 100 to 100%. So all really important to do, but bringing resiliency into the conversation has got to be a critical part. Please join me in thanking Randy and Hank. Thank you, Randy. We're going to go right into another Verge Talk and bring back to the stage one of our great partners here at Verge Hawaii, the Director of Business and Economic Development and Tourism for the state. Please welcome Luis Salaveria. Sorry.
If you feel like the way that I feel, I think we all realize that the world is a very scary place right now. It's also very confusing and very complicated with so many different perspectives, so many different positions, and so many different opinions. Where's David? That's why we drink, right? One thing is certain, we are headed towards this flashpoint, this paradigm shift, this day of reckoning. Because you see, we've spent the better part of human existence just getting to this point where technology and innovation coexist to allow for the population to grow. Major advancements in agriculture, medicine, manufacturing, and science have allowed for the carrying capacity of this earth to increase exponentially. Yet in many ways, we still convert our energy the same way we've been doing it since 1000 BC. We burn fossil fuels. And in 1000 BC, the world's population was 0.5% of what it is today. So now, I'm not proclaiming that modern life and where we are in human existence didn't need to happen or it was bad in some way, shape, or form. Far from it, actually. I personally enjoy the trappings of modern life. And modern life is growing at this extremely exponential, fast pace. I don't even recognize some of the things that are happening, 20 years ago, much less even 10 years ago. But modern life has come at a cost. It took a lot, and I mean a lot of energy to get the things that we have today, the items we use, the things we buy, the food we consume. All of those things needed a lot of energy to produce. And you know what? It also leaves a lot of waste. But to get us here, we did this. Relatively unchecked, the pace of human advancement was only limited by the pace which we could pump out enough energy to make things happen. We found resources. We extracted them with more and more efficient methods. We explored and surveyed every inch of the world looking for these resources. And you know what? The mantra sang true. Drill, baby, drill. But that mantra wasn't true for everybody. And now, people all over the world are starting to wake up. And they're starting to rise up. We're now beginning to embrace the idea that we gotta change our current path, or that we will fall victim to what is widely known as the tragedy of the commons. The idea that we gotta stop acting independently and protect and manage our resources, because if we fail, we all fail. And yes, I said resource because, at the end of the day, there's really only one resource that counts. So momentum and history will be on the side that chooses to protect that resource. A resource very eloquently described by even Pope Francis. Our common home. Maybe you see where I'm going with this. The commons is our common. It's every single common on the face of this earth, and there wouldn't be any greater tragedy than to lose our common home. Now we can't go backwards and turn away from progress. Now is time to redouble our efforts and band together to make that next great leap of human existence and to care for our common home. We have the means to make it happen, ladies and gentlemen. We can rebuild. We have the technology. We have the capability to make and create a better place. Better, stronger, and cleaner. And now the question is, do we have the will? Are we all working together for a common goal? Are our leaders sending the right signals to everybody here? Let me take this time to talk about what moves policymakers and leaders. There is no one solution. We want a diversified portfolio. We want to connect and modernize our grids. We want solutions that's going to be balanced, technically, economically, environmentally, and culturally. We want innovative solutions, and we want to showcase that to the rest of the world. And lastly, we want solutions that are not only going to benefit consumers, but also producers. Producers like a utility or an independent power producer. It's a simple concept, everybody. It's win-win and win again. So approach the state with these fundamental goals in mind, and you will get attention. And some of you here already have our attention. I personally have talked with, I don't know how many of you here today. Present it as such, and government will be your biggest advocate. We will be your biggest cheerleader. So now that I've talked about the what, where, when, and why, the question is now the how. Governance. Governance is the way that rules, norms, and actions are structured, regulated, and people are held accountable. And it's not quite as easy as it may seem. I mean, just take a look at what's happening nationally and even internationally. But you know what? In many ways, governance is how things get done. So, in order to move society along, the innovators and the early adopters need to convince the early majority and the late majority to move, to get off their asses. And you know what? The laggards, forget the laggards. There'll always be laggards. So when we get together at functions like this, here at Verge, are we reaching out to that early majority and that late majority? Are we, in the words of Chairman Iwase, are we out there reaching out to that man or woman on the bus stop? And I look at this portion of the normal distribution curve, and I say, there lies all of the momentum to get things done. But we can't convince the early and late majority to shift their own paradigm if we keep changing the landscape, or if the baseline keeps moving, or at the risk of offending people here, we keep on telling everybody, hey, look at me, I have the solutions, I am your salvation. That is not the way things get done. We won't win through argument. We will win by setting an example and taking action. So the opposite of tragedy is fortune. And the aversion of tragedy is success. And in the context of climate change and sustainability, fortune and success are not options, they're absolutes. They are what needs to happen. Failure is not an option, everybody. There's way too much at risk. Last year, I stood before you and I asked what kind of future we were going to leave for the next generation. And I said that the collective knowledge in this room could help Hawaii get and reach its 100% renewable goals. And you know what? I still believe that. But this year, the stakes are much higher. With everything that's going on in the world, our challenge is to be prepared for that sea change. Be prepared for that paradigm shift that I think everyone here knows is coming. And we have the collective knowledge. Hawaii has the opportunity to be the model for the rest of the world, so let's not lose that opportunity, everyone. Now is the time where we need everybody here to start emerging as leaders and move everyone forward together. We need to own the problem in order to solve it. And it's about the collective. It's about the collective care of our planet, our common home. Thank you, everybody.
Right, aloha. How are we this morning? Our final day of Verge Hawaii. How many of you saw Ke Aloha's poetry performance yesterday? Wow, right? Yeah. I mean, I spoke briefly when introducing him to sort of my and our passion and commitment here at GreenBiz and with Verge of, you know, in many ways, like, we focus on systemic solutions, right? It's also important to remember that we as people operate systemically, and there are so many aspects of who we are as leaders and people, and remembering as much time as we spend in our heads, the importance of dropping down every so often into our hearts. And so on this closing day, it is my true honor and pleasure to introduce Taimane, who is a Hawaii native, from this island of Oahu, whose music and ukulele passion and inspiration come and connect deeply to her own passion for nature. And so without any further ado, in fact, I'll give a plug briefly. You can find more information about her online and follow her tour. She'll be touring with Michael Franti later this year and coming out to California in September. Please give Taimane a very warm welcome.
Wow. I have never heard a mashup of Led Zeppelin and Fleur de Lis and everything else that was in there. That was amazing. Thank you very much, Tamine. Wow. So I'm so excited to present this panel because it combines two things that I feel very strongly about myself. When you put purpose and passion together, I think that you are unstoppable. We are all unstoppable. And this group of women here is doing amazing things in their own right in very different places. You've heard from Shalonda Baker here in Hawaii, working on energy justice issues in this state. We have Vienne Trung. You haven't met Vienne yet, but she's with Green for All, and it's a national nonprofit focused on climate justice, right? And Rose McKinney-James, and she's been working on issues of energy equity for, I think I learned yesterday, 2 decades. You're currently based in Nevada, but long-term perspective on this topic that we've been hearing a lot about this week, the power of community inclusion. And I guess what I'd love to do is start with the concept of what is a community, right? And because as we were prepping for this, I thought, well, who should be in this community? So what I would love to throw out at you ladies first is who is in the community, and should everyone in that community have equal voice, right? So should everyone's opinion get an equal weight? Rose, you caught my eye, so I'm going to start with you. Sorry.
So maybe I'll respond by saying, in my opinion, everyone should have a seat at the table. And as it relates to equality, anyone who is impacted by a regulatory decision, a legislative decision, should have the opportunity to participate at whatever level they determine to be appropriate, but they should absolutely be given a path to the table. And I think that's part of the conversation we need to have.
Yeah, so, but even put a finer point on it, like who is this? Who are we talking about?
It's people who look like me. There are people who are not fully taking advantage of many of the programs that are available. There are folks who are paying power bills but not absolutely understanding what they're paying for. There are folks who want to participate and have lovely aspirations for advancing their own personal goals toward sustainability, but don't have the information that they need. And let me defer to my colleagues. I'm sure they have additional answers.
I love what you said, and if I can build on that, both on the question of the table, but also on the question of should it be given equal weight. My mom had 11 kids. I'm the youngest. And when I was growing up, I had no say at the table. I was invited. Sometimes I got to eat, but I did not have equal say. Nor should I have, because I didn't have the experience and I didn't have the knowledge to really contribute to conversations around where our finances should go. We didn't have those conversations, but just to say. And to draw the metaphor out a little bit, I don't think everybody should have the same amount of say. I think people who are closer to the problems, who have more experience to the issue, or who should actually have more understanding or perspective to add that is different than the traditional status quo, should have more say. At a time when you have a president who can tweet out something like "Kofifi" and that be a viral issue, and you have people who are drawing from thousands and hundreds of years of ancestral knowledge who are not being heard, I think that we should give people who have not been heard more say. And I will add to the question of the table that one of the things that I struggle with, having had grown up from Oakland, which continues to be really trapped and suffocating in its own pollution, that not only do we need to have a seat at the table, but I think we should begin thinking about what does it look like for us to move the table to the communities like Oakland in our country, in our states.
Oh, I love both of those answers. I just want to say ditto, but also, I think we're constantly determining who the community is. And to sort of echo Vienne, we do need to address the communities that have been historically excluded from the conversation. I think it echoes you as well, Rose. The idea of equity, I mean, this is a question that we've been throwing around, really is embedded in your second, or this is a term we've been throwing around. I mean, it's sort of embedded in your second question, which is, does everyone get equal weight? Well, equity says that we are trying to make sure that everyone gets to the same place. So if we have communities that have been historically excluded from conversations, historically marginalized, and have faced disproportionate impacts due to environmental justice issues, we have to get them up to the level of everyone else. So in many ways, their voices must be heard more loudly. And so once we create equity, and actually policies that can create equity, then we can have more equality in the conversation.
Is it a matter of that people aren't being invited to the conversation? Or are they being invited but not participating?
So maybe a little bit of both. In many regulatory proceedings, because they are somewhat complex, most regulatory bodies have an intervening opportunity, and so you have this representative group who may represent a certain perspective. But the reality is that most people who are impacted by those decisions are not involved. They are not sort of clued in or connected to the information that's available. And so they have to depend on networks that historically have not been involved. In my advocacy work over these 2 decades, I recognize that it's been that long, I am frequently faced with folks who have a different perspective than I do, who attempt to speak for or become the voice of a segment of the community that is not actually represented. And I take issue with that. They also use the economics of the circumstances to try to suggest that certain policies should not move forward because of the implications on X, where X has not been involved in the conversation. So they've not been given the opportunity to present their own genuine and authentic views around an issue.
So how do you tap in? I know, Jan, you just got back from Germany, I believe, or from Europe. How do can you offer examples of things in other places where maybe this is being approached in a different way? I mean, what can we learn from elsewhere?
I can share that. So I was in Germany as the opening keynote to the European Union on their conversation on green jobs, the same time that President Trump was withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement and was, from what I could see, the only American in the room. And that was not fun, representing why our president was pulling out. But what was heartening to see was that a lot of people were stepping forward, and across the country, across Europe, but also across the country, in the last couple of weeks, I think we saw NGOs and private industries and businesses and state leaders really stepping up where our president was stepping back. And that's been great. And as we do so, I think what we need to know and do is exactly what Rose said, which is be mindful in the how. Because just because a meeting was publicly noticed on a website does not mean that the community had language access. It does not mean that the community knew the website existed. It does not mean that the location was accessible in places that do not have access to public transportation, in places or for families that pays exorbitant amounts of money just for their gas. It's not really accessible depending on where the location is. And so I can share a few examples of how I've seen it done well across the country, but maybe even more helpful for you, instead of me listing the encyclopedia of practices, is if you go to a website called thecleanpowerplan.com. There is a first chapter there called Community Engagement, and it includes the best practices of across the US, and the material and the case studies and the recommendations in there are generated by community organizers and vetted by community organizers, NGOs, lawyers, and others, as these are the best case studies that we have seen in the country. So hope that's helpful.
I just want to piggyback a little bit on that. I mean, so a couple of things come to mind when I think about people being at the table and whether or not they're engaged. I mean, we can create structures and institutions that create pathways for participation, but if there's no education, and if there aren't meaningful ways to actually get to the community and get them the information, then all of these structures are for naught. I mean, here in Hawaii, we have a great public comments avenue with the PUC, but many people don't have the vocabulary to even engage the PUC. Many people don't understand the magnitude of the transition that we face, and its potential to change lives structurally. And so without that education, without sort of letting people know that this is an important issue that they should engage, and it's not something invisible. I mean, energy is sexy to all of us. I mean, we're here for 3 days nerding out, but for a lot of people, I mean, just turning on the lights is enough.
Exactly.
So we have to figure out a way to educate.
To the point of lip service, right? How does a business get involved in this without being accused of being too opportunistic, or, I mean, because every community includes businesses, church, places of worship,
So I'll give you an example. I'm affiliated with a very large company in Las Vegas that has the largest number of employees in the state. And through our CSR efforts, she's whispering in GM, it's okay. Through our community corporate social responsibility efforts, we focus on both our customers and our employees. So by drilling down to gain an understanding of what motivates our employees and giving them a venue to advance those interests, we've been able to determine a pathway for a business to advance sort of the corporate philosophy around sustainability, but it's based on understanding the community through the lens of our employees and our customers.
Yeah, so that, I think, one of the things that the person in the White House, I can't even say his name, managed to do very well was to tie jobs to the reason you got. So how does that become, right, so the power of this transition, if you will, is that there could be absolutely amazing new jobs. So how do we rally around that and get these people involved in that way and make that argument so unbelievably economic, right? And just the powerful argument that we need.
I think that you touched on exactly what I feel like is the missing piece, communicating the why. Why should people engage in this process? Amidst the many ways that they're being attacked right now, or the different urgencies that their families are going through, as a person in a community that's suffering from poverty or high levels of crime, or access to health care or jobs instability, or trying to figure out the cost of health care in college, why should they come to this regulatory meeting? And first is communicating why this matters to helping them either create access to jobs, diversifying their economy, reducing the cost of energy, or helping to improve their lives in some significant and immediate way that they can visually see. And then communicating how they can actually meaningfully engage in the process with dignity. That they won't be ridiculed or laughed for not using the right acronyms or synonyms or, encyclopedic 5-syllable words, right? How do we make sure that they're welcomed into the room and being really meaningfully engaged in a way that is true? And I've seen it done well. So coming from your neighbor across the Pacific from California, we had a process around cap and trade. And it's immediately one of those things that people usually put the blinders on and you're just like, I don't care, I'm not interested. Because it's a pretty wonky problem, and it touched on both the regulatory agency but also the legislative process, so even more, twice as complicated. What we did is we went to the community and said, did you know that refinery across the street from you, that they can continue polluting for the rest of your life and your kid's life? And there's nothing to really mitigate that. We wanted you to be part of the process of helping to inform why this matters and what they should be doing instead. And they began to say, okay, well, I can sit with that conversation. We had an 8-10-year process at this point and have grown to an organization and a coalition of five organizations to now 150. On affordable housing, transportation, and number of people, touching on hundreds and thousands of people, and these people who were connected initially through a conversation of cap and trade, so wonky, to now being what some of our boldest and strongest advocates and supporters of environmental and energy policy, because they understood the importance of that to their lives. And so it's the why that brought them in, but it's also the immediate benefits that they saw that kept them in.
And yeah. I love what's happening in California around this issue, and I know a little bit about the coalition, so congratulations on that.
A lot of us were part of it, yeah.
Yeah, so, one of the issues that came up in the panel yesterday was this idea that the frontline organizations, NGOs, who have worked with communities on affordable housing issues, on social justice issues, are not always energy literate. And so that's a gap that I've identified as an educator to sort of get that coalition that's already working with those communities to understand what's happening on the energy front and understand the stakes that are at play. I mean, in California, when we have multifamily housing that can, put up solar panels and then displace any sort of dirty generating plant, I mean, that's major for those communities. I mean, it's economically empowering and also will change the circumstances, the day-to-day lived circumstances of that community. So it's powerful.
So this notion of empowerment is absolutely critical to the conversation. I think you know that we've just finished the Nevada legislative session. We were shocked by our ability to pass all 11 of our clean energy bills, 9 of which have now become law. Incredibly impressive outpouring from communities and representatives of communities who had never been involved in this process, because there was a very strategic and very direct attempt to identify those who needed to be a part of the conversation, and they became empowered and emboldened. And policymakers and decision makers were hearing from people that they'd never heard from before. And it helped to change the trajectory of the conversation. So we have an example of what can occur when you thoroughly engage those who want to have a voice in their own destiny. I mean, that was the critical component. And we did speak to the economic development opportunities. We did speak to the job creation. But we spoke, more importantly, to a change in demographic. And I'm not just talking about ethnic, I'm talking about folks who are 40 years younger than I am for the first time, actively involved in the conversation.
After Professor Baker. After Professor Baker. I love it. Well, one of my concerns and why I do this work is, look, we had the head of DBED stand here and talk to us about climate change, and it is a real issue, right? We have Naomi Klein, who wrote This Changes Everything, and we know that the threat is imminent. And what could happen is that we suddenly realize that we need all of this infrastructure in the ground, we need all of these changes to be made, and we have to do it yesterday, and it will absolutely mean the cementing in of inequality. But if we are thinking about the inequality issues up front, and if we're thinking about ways to use energy as a tool for economic empowerment now, then when we are faced with climate change, we won't have to scramble, right? I mean, it's imminent, but we're designing the plans that hopefully can embed equity, as opposed to after the fact saying, well, we'll think about poor people later. We'll think about, the most marginalized and the most vulnerable to climate change later, and it won't get us anywhere.
Exactly, and when we do that right, I think, because when we're in the community, not only is there an opportunity to build with each other, but there's also a looming threat. Coal companies, they pass out backpacks, like right before school. There's a deep level of community investment. Shell and Chevron has invested heavily into families and helping to provide, $100 gift cards for your gas tanks. So they have built their relationship with neighbors, and what they say around all these environmental and energy policies is, they're trying to gouge you. These energy elitists are trying to gouge you, and so don't trust them, trust us. And so if we don't begin to understand the importance not only of having the space and conversation that is inclusive, as a necessity to having good policy, but also as a way to understand that we have lost in the fight and we are behind in building the community already. And if we do this right, then it's not only a threat about what we're moving against, which is a climate change and the 200 million climate refugees we may get by 2050, projected by UN. If we don't do something, the threat is there, but also the opportunity is there. We can heal how we treat each other and how we treat Mother Earth. We can begin to build and support grassroots democracy. We can begin to create economic diversification in places like Appalachia to Sovereignty Land, to other places across the country, to Navajo Nation. And when we do that right, then we can actually begin to move away from the fear to moving into a compelling vision of the future. That's where I want to spend my time.
I love that. When Shalonda spoke a couple of days ago, she introduced this concept to me of energy democracy. And I'm probably going to leave this conference with that sort of underscoring my thoughts about this topic. But I think the other thing is I want to challenge, particularly those who are in industry, who are coming into communities and attempting to advance sort of their priorities, to understand that it's important to seek first to understand and then be understood. Not this arrogant notion of we know best and we're smarter than you and we're going to do what's in your best interest without determining a path to a conversation where you at least ask. Just ask the question. It is incredibly important. We built a remarkable coalition by simply being willing not to be the smartest person in the room and ultimately finding out that in many instances we were not, to advancing policies that will be beneficial to the broadest of our community participants.
One question from the sidebar, Elaine?
You guys are asking all the questions that we have. So at this point, I mean, it's awesome in that, we were really interested in how can businesses get involved and how can people in the audience specifically get involved. And, you guys are kind of answering a lot of these questions, but I think maybe getting into some of the more specifics to say, how should businesses work with your specific organizations or specific other coalitions, or what can people specifically do right now in their work?
So, and this could probably be the wrap-up question, and I loved the examples that you gave, Bien, of the way the oil and coal industries have engaged. So what can, businesses are ready to really engage, I think, for the first, seriously, and cities, and there's a lot of really great momentum. So let's give this audience some words of advice, some tips for engagement in the days and months ahead. Shalana, we'll start with you.
Well, so from where I sit at the university, I think providing tools of education is the key, and we'll be providing those tools. So we're developing a framework to roll out into communities so that they have information about Hawaii's energy landscape, and that will hopefully engage those communities in the energy conversation. We're working through other stakeholders who've already been in the conversation or who are frontline social justice organizations to give them those tools so that they can also work with communities. So stay tuned, but there will be more information in the hands of communities pretty soon.
Yeah, and I would echo the same thing. And at a time when you have governmental leaders stepping aside or stepping backwards, it's more important than ever for businesses to step forward and to help the community. And you can do that by how you are hiring, your hiring practices. You can help that by looking at how do you support publicly the role of equity. Series, which is helping to organize the business community around a lot of sustainability issues. Their companies have said that equity is a non-negotiable in carbon pricing. That's huge, and that sends an important signal to the rest of the community that this is not just a social justice thing, but it's a community thing. And then you can also provide resources and donate in-kind materials. So we worked with Medline in donating medical supplies to Flint when they were suffering, and that has been crucial for the community. So think about the materials that you have and how that can be helpful to communities that don't have any.
So I think the business community has a very real opportunity to leverage. They can leverage their insights, they can leverage their intellectual capacity by being an active stakeholder and first coming to understand the needs of the communities in which they conduct business, and then being a partner in those conversations, most specifically by being engaged themselves and not just being on the receiving end. A business has the capacity to provide both economic resources, and I want to underscore the intellectual resources that can become very important to the education component, to the job creation component, to the pipeline component. And so just being present and active can make a meaningful contribution.
Thank you, ladies, for being at the forefront of this movement and for caring and for being smart about it. I really appreciate you being here today. Thank you very much. Please thank you.
Thank you, Rose, Vienne, Shalanda, Heather, as always. Before I bring out Pono Shim, so we wind this down, you recall on Tuesday when we started this with Ramsey Tom and the beautiful, not just the Oli, but the beautiful presentation he gave and the metaphor he brought to us about being in a canoe, paddling together. And that's come up a number of times that throughout the last 3 days. That really was just a great visualization. It's not the only visualization, as you'll hear in a second, but that spirit, as we just saw on this stage, in this panel, as we've seen throughout the last 3 days, on this stage, in the breakouts, in the hallways, in the summits, in the conversations, is, I think, so critical that we are all in this together. And we know that, we get that sort of intellectually and maybe even emotionally, but from the roll up your sleeves, get things done, do what needs to be done, take the bold, audacious steps, the getting out of our comfort zone to go from incremental to accelerated change that we need here in Hawaii and everywhere. We are all in this together. This is our journey together. I think most of us are proud and happy and excited to be on this journey with one another. It's what I think all of us give the others support, encouragement, and a sense of purpose, but also just, getting through the tough times. We've had tough times. We'll continue to have tough times. It's politically and sometimes economically and environmentally. There will be things that happen that are going to be scary. But we have one another, and that's been such a fabulous part of this event. And I hope that as you leave this event in a few minutes, that you take that with you, that you remember that we are a community, even though we may assemble only once a year. We are a community, and we're here for one another in a lot of different ways and a lot of different media. And it's so critical, and thank you for being part of that community, part of this Verge community, and for being on this journey with us, with all of you. It is a gift, a critical gift that we all need to do the really important work that we all do. So, as I said before, it's not necessarily a canoe, turns out. You're going to hear that in a second as I bring to the stage one of Hawaii's most talented storytellers and influential business leaders. Going to talk about paddling forward or maybe something else. Please welcome to the stage the CEO of the Oahu Economic Development Board, Pono Shim.
Aloha. Andy Karsner yesterday spoke about passion and performance. And maybe we can just reveal a little bit of that before we depart. Now, when I was a child, I hated going to the pediatrician's office. And the reason why was because I was going to get probed, pricked, asked to cough. Those of you who are my age, 50 or 60, you know what I'm talking about, men. I was going to get hit in the knee, and I hated it. But there was one thing that I really enjoyed when I went to the doctor, and it was actually in the lobby, and it was on the reception table, and it was a periodical. Do you guys remember what it was? Highlights. Highlights. And there was only one thing that I liked in highlights, because I wasn't a good reader. Do you guys remember what that was? Hidden objects. And something pissed me off when somebody did something. And what was that? circle all the objects. And the reason why that ticked me off is because it ruins the whole game. The reason why I share that with you is I am a storyteller. And most speakers today go around, in my opinion, circling everybody's objects, telling everybody what they need to know or what they want them to know. And in my stories, there are a lot of hidden objects. And depending on who you are, your experiences, your perceptions, you might find a few. But I'm not going to go around circling these objects. I might say there might be a few hidden objects there. And that way, this becomes yours. So, just a quick story about Taimane, because of connection and what these ladies who were just up on stage were sharing about connection and community. I first learned of Taimane, and by the way, Taimane's name means diamond in Samoan. So Taimane is Samoan and German. I first learned of Tai when she was, I think, 12 or 13 years of age, and she was playing in the showroom with Don Ho, and he had this child virtuoso. That's not why I learned of her. I learned of this child who was playing on the streets of Waikiki with homeless men, with their band, so that they could earn money so they could eat dinner. And that's what Tai was doing. So you want to talk about passion, and you just saw performance? She didn't come up here by herself today. She came up here with all that which has been a part of her life, and she revealed passion and performance. The sleigh that I'm carrying around my neck was given to me 3 weeks ago, hand-delivered to me by a courier, the day after I had done a speaking engagement on Maui. I've never seen a lei like this. This is like a niho palawa. Normally it's made with the strands of hair, and it holds a pendant, which could be a whale tooth or carved wooden piece or object. The friend who gave this to me has only given 3 of these away. One was to her closest friend who died, and she said, I'm giving this to you to wear whenever you are doing something very special and that you need to have somebody with you. And so this is the first time I'm actually wearing this lei in public, because this is a very special time. I think it's a very special moment, and it's a very special message. And so I, like you, do not come here alone. And maybe there's a few hidden objects in that. I heard several themes this weekend: connecting people, or urgency, cooperation, collaboration, boldness, passion, and performance. As Joel was mentioning about the canoe, and maybe there's another metaphor for the canoe. Hands up, how many of you have ever paddled in a canoe? Good number. There are many different types of canoes. There are racing canoes, there are fishing canoes, there are double-hulled canoes, which are voyaging canoes. And depending on what you want to do or need to do, that's the type of canoe you will use. But we use it very readily, and I've talked to Ramsey about it, and he knew what I was going to do. You know what? It's time to shift from a canoe. You know why? Because if everybody in this room jumped on a canoe, we sink the canoe. This is more of an orchestra than it is a canoe. And sometimes the trombones need to tone down so we can hear the oboes. We need to start conducting as an orchestra, so we make this music that Taimane shares, that everybody can feel and hear. So how do we connect? Can we build a movement, or do we already have a movement waiting to happen? An illustration. I was in a conversation recently, it was about tourism in a summit with Japan and Hawaii. And the question was, how do we market to millennials? And this is directly parallel to what I heard this weekend. How do we market to millennials? And the answer was, that's why we're doing sustainable ecotourism. I don't think anybody recognized a fundamental issue in just the question itself and the answer. Because the very question is just a transaction. It's not a relationship. How do we market to millennials? How many people in this room have been born since 1980? Please raise your hand. There's a lot of you. We are so fortunate that we have that generation, but let me tell you how economists do things. What we do is we look back and we do analysis and forensics, and then we reveal information and data. So this is what happens quite often. We look back and say, that's the greatest generation. And then there was mine, which was the largest because mom and dad got busy. And then after us came X, the unknown quantity, Gen X. And then came this next group. And because they were all born with computers, we accuse them of being what? I say accused, of being what? Yeah. And they hate that name. That's not how you name people. When we name people, we name them with a purpose, a mission, a hope, a relationship. And I have the privilege of working with them quite often, and this is what happens. I find out that they're brilliant, they're innovative, they're less materialistic than their elder siblings. They're concerned about the future of the planet. They so desire mentorship and leadership. They want to know, and they bounce. And they got a hypersensitive BS meter, which is one of the reasons why they bounce. But we think that they've got a problem. And so this is who I believe that generation is. They're not the millennials. They're the great rebounders generation. You guys are the ones who are helping us to rebound from all the crap that mine screwed up, to get us back on track. So when we talk about connecting with the community, could it be as simple as really helping people to define and identify who they are? How many of you in this room are rebounders generation? Please raise your hand. Yeah, and we need you, because you know what? By the time we get 2045, I'll be 82. It's not going to be me, it's going to be you and your children. So I'm going to wrap this up with something that I read this morning, and then I'm going to ask Ramsey to come on stage with me and close it up the way that we do it in Hawaii. This morning, I had to write a letter, a support letter for someone. He asked me to write this letter because he was applying for a fellowship. Maybe this reveals something about who we are and what we do and how it connects to why you're here. And please, when you leave, take this with you. Aloha mai. Please accept this letter of support on behalf of Kia'i Lee for the Pacific Century Fellows Class of 2017. I first met Kia'i 3 years ago when he was working with the state and administering a federal grant for Housing First. And time is not a measurement of admiration. Of admiration I have for his commitment to Hawaii and our people. Kia'i revealed through his listening and engagement a deep resonance that was not about just getting the work done. Rather, his attention and response was about sharing truth, healing, connecting, and building as the team worked to enroll and house some of our community members who have given up on themselves. Quite remarkable. Kia'i recognizes a full complement of people who make up Hawaii today and searches for meaningful actions and translations to touch, inspire, and or lead others to deeply care and serve Hawaii and her people. His is not a boisterous leadership, but a voice which chooses his words cautiously and reveals them with a gentle strength. Reminiscent of the wise elders who spoke softly, pulling people closer to themselves. His is a style that I'm observing being diminished in Hawaii, possibly by the omniscient influence of social media's culture to get attention or look at me. Kia'i lives a special heritage of giving attention or watch me, so sturdily passed through his Polynesian culture. Watch me is about modeling, being the example, about giving. Look at me is about getting attention, taking, and taking more. I can't find a greater example of watch me versus look at me on the national stage than Marcus Mariota, whose occupation as an NFL quarterback is latent with examples of look at me. But Marcus' upbringing and heritage is a leadership style that endears people who watch his success and failures, and more than ever today, we need those characteristics throughout our community. This influence runs long and runs deep. If Kia'i is given the opportunity to be a member of the PCF cohort, he will surely layer the many relationships and experiences on his foundation. And he will also have the opportunity to share the most precious gift of Hawaii with the other young leaders. Not that which is taught in the classroom, but that which is passed on at the dinner table, in prayers, in laboring and struggle. Struggle, a most important characteristic of leadership. As an electrician, Kia'i would experience a median income between $61,000 and to a 90 percentile of $94,000 a year in the construction trades. With added side jobs, he could easily invest the time to earn a respectable income over 6 figures, caring for his family and living a modestly comfortable life in our high-priced Hawaii. When he walked away to become a social worker, his income prospects shifted from a median of $47,000 to $76,000 a year. I have a silent, anchored respect for social workers like Kia'i who reveal their passion and aloha through their decisions and performance. Mahalo for allowing me to share a few words on his behalf and for your consideration. If we use sacrifice with sharing, it ain't sharing. As we leave this room, I just ask all of us to consider the prophecy that was given by Auntie Pilahi Paki, whom Ramsey talked about, that in the 21st century, the world will search for peace. And they'll look to Hawaii because Hawaii has that key. And that key is aloha. Aloha and mahalo. Come, brother. Would you everyone stand and grab a hand? Joel, would you come? Shauna, come. Mike. Come. There's a song that we sing after every gathering of our family and friends in Hawaii. And it's called Hawaii Aloha, and it speaks to being born of this place and these sands. And I've asked Ramsey to join me, and then you start, Boo, because Bernard's not here.
Join us if you know it. Hum along if you don't.
E Hawaii e kuone hanau e kuhome kulahi vine oli no au ina pono lani o e Hawaii aloha e hau oli na o pio Hawaii nei oli mai na ahe makani e pa mai nei mau ke aloha no Hawaii e hau oli na o pio Hawaii nei oli mai na ahe makani e pa mai nei mau ke aloha
Thank you. Mahalo. Thank you. I think that's all there is to say about that. Mahalo to everyone. Aloha. We'll be back here next year, June 12th through 14th in this very room. We hope to see you again. Safe travels. Aloha. Thank you, man.
Yeah, you're welcome. Great.
I don't know. Sidebar after dark. All right, I still think we should have done sidebar after dark.
It was a wonderful way to wrap up our 3 wonderful plenary days of VERGE Hawaii, Asia Pacific Clean Energy Summit. What do you think, John?
You know, the one thing I thought was tremendous this year is just the amazing diversity that we had on our stage. And I don't mean just race or gender, but thought diversity that we hadn't had last year. So we had a little tension. We had some pushing and pulling, which is what happens when you want progress. So that was the most exciting part for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think the key here is that these challenges are not linear. Everything is sort of interconnected, and so you've got to bring in a lot of different kinds of voices in order to actually work through a lot of this hard stuff. And so the nature of VERGE is to bring together the convergence of these types of perspectives. So the challenges ahead are great, but Hawaii is starting to get there and really having those hard conversations, and I'm glad that we were able to elevate many of them on our stage today and also over the last couple days. So if you'd like a copy of the archive, make sure that you're registered for the VERGE Virtual, and we'll send that to you. This is an archived live stream. We're so happy that we were able to bring this to you, and we hope to see you at VERGE 17 this September, and then next year VERGE Hawaii 18 in June. Mahalo.
Committed to achieve 100% renewable energy, and we've already made a lot of progress. A smarter and more efficient grid is being developed. It'll help us safely and reliably integrate even more clean energy from many renewable sources, including rooftop solar. And as an option to rooftop solar, you may buy an interest in the electricity produced by a renewable energy project, like a solar or wind farm. With more clean energy coming into the grid, driving an electric vehicle makes more sense than ever. It's a great way to save money and go green. EV owners can charge their vehicles when rates are at their lowest. And EV charging stations are being added throughout the islands. The Hawaiian Electric companies support a green future for Hawaii to reduce our dependence on imported oil and your total energy bill. Find out more about clean, affordable, renewable energy at hawaiianelectric.com/ourvision.
Hawaii Energy. We educate island families and businesses about how we can all conserve and efficiently use energy. Helping Hawaii make smart energy choices. Hawaii Energy.